like to introduce you to this wonderful building, the first African American YMCA in the country. And we have been very fortunate to have the Thurgood Marshall family support the organization, support all the things that we do, and we're very pleased with that. Over the years, I've been with the organization for 23 years, opening the building. It had been closed for 10 years in 1982, and I think that now we can say that this is definitely a part of the community, a part of Washington, D.C., and the Thurgood Marshall Center Trust across the country.
Yes.
We're making a huge impact in terms of what Justice Marshall represented. Tonight I have the great honor of introducing our board chair, Reverend Dr. Benjamin Chavis. He is the president of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. It's a lot to say. And also the producer and also the presenter of the Chavis Chronicles. So we have been so fortunate to have him with us, and so now we want to share him with you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's give a little hand to Thomasina Yoder for her long tenure. I'm going to be uncharacteristically brief because we have some scholars, we have some, in my view, brothers and sisters who represent the legacy of Thurgood Marshall. I bring you all greetings from the board of directors of the Thurgood Marshall Center Trust. I'm very pleased to be the chair of the board, but the board is the board. And we have some distinguished brothers and sisters who serve on the board. I thought about what I would say tonight, and it's simply this, to ask the question: how do we keep a legacy alive? Is it by mere reference of the past? Maybe so. How do we keep the legacy of Thurgood Marshall alive? 70 years ago, 1954, I was 6 years old in the first grade in Granville County, North Carolina, attending the North Carolina colored school system. So even though I was in the first grade when the Brown decision was made, I still went through all of elementary school, all of junior high school, all of high school in a segregated school system. Because what happened after the Brown decision, the lawyers would tell you, there were states and counties and cities that fought it every inch of the way. They had no intention, no proclivity to treat black children equally with white children. And it wasn't just in the South. I think Malcolm X had it right. The South, when it comes to race, is anything south of the Canadian border. The whole country was the South when it came to race. So that's why I'm so pleased. And one of the things that freedom fighters do, we have to recognize other freedom fighters who may be in the midst. And I see back there on the back row, Attorney Barbara Arwan. Barbara, thank you for thank you for your leadership. And this is 2024, we're going to get that vote out.
That's right.
So the last thing I want to say, if you want to keep Thurgood Marshall's legacy alive, we got to get this vote out.
Yes, that's right.
Because there are powers that be that want to not only turn things back, but even deny what the history was to get us here.
That's right.
Banning books, changing curriculum, and even religion is being used to justify far right-wing evangelical. And I know the Thurgood Marshall Center is a nonprofit, so I don't want to get the Thurgood Marshall Center in trouble, but I'll just say this. Donald Donald Trump is an existential threat to our democracy.
Yes, yes, yes.
Donald Trump is an existential threat to the legacy of Thurgood Marshall. Thank you for coming out tonight. Let's have a great program. Now, I have the honor and the privilege to introduce and present one of the baddest sisters in the media. I mean, she's the White House correspondent for the American Urban Radio Network. But more than that, when Ebony Morris speaks or raises her hands, everybody pays attention. And we're pleased to have her on our board of directors, and she's going to be the MC tonight, the mistress of ceremony tonight, the mistress of ceremony tonight. Let's give her a hand, the one and only Ebony Morris.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chavis. But you know you one of the baddest men in the room, I just have to say that. Every time, and then, to be honest, every time he grabs the mic, I listen because it is like nourishment. It is like food. I learn more and I grow more. And I don't say that just to throw compliments. I say that because I look forward to hearing what you have to say. To those who have come today, thank you so much for joining us on this momentous event. And I want to just repeat this quote by Thurgood Marshall. In recognizing the humanity of our fellow beings, we pay ourselves the highest tribute. Today we are gathered in a space of hollow ground within a city that has witnessed the march of history in a country that proclaims democracy as its heartbeat. And in a nation that still is grappling with who it will be, which way it will go. Will it go MAGA? Will it go democracy? While still agonizing over the deep scars of racial injustice and the unfulfilled promises of equality. Maya Angelou said, where there is no struggle, there is no strength. And as we mark the 70th anniversary of Brown v. Board decision here at the Thurgood Marshall Center Trust, we are reminded of the struggle that led to this landmark ruling. Thurgood Marshall, whose legacy we honor, said once that the measure of a country's greatness is the ability to retain compassion in times of crisis. God, we need that now. And this profound reflection captures the essence of the battle fought in 1954, a battle not just for the desegregation of schools, but for the soul of this nation. We have always been fighting for the soul of this nation. And in those days, African Americans emerged from the shadows of slavery, the false promises of Reconstruction, and the crushing oppression of Jim Crow, and lived in a society that offered them the hollow shell of freedom, but denied them the full fruits of citizenship. Education, a suppressed right for all, was marred by the lie of separate but equal. Thurgood Marshall and his team, many who were the first, second generations since slavery, fought tirelessly to dismantle. And as Dr. Chavis said earlier, echoes of that era resound in our current struggles. We find our schools at the center of a battle over what history will be told, with what books, as they ban them over and over and try to bury the truth. So we stand in a nation that not only failed to fully realize Dr. King's dream, but also Thurgood Marshall's vision of a true and equal society. So I am privileged to be able to moderate this distinguished conversation today with the expert guest. So let me just tell y'all this. As we were talking, and I was talking with some of the panelists on today, I said, don't tell me what you're going to say, because every time we started down this road, there was a fire that began, you could see, to burn and illuminate, because we're still grappling with the same issues. And before we get to our expert panel, I got to bring up one person. This is my personal Shiro. She may not realize it, but when she walks in the room, I always have to bring her out. And we talked about her earlier, but Ms. Barbara Armwine, Attorney Barbara Armwine, can you stand up for a second? I just want you to come to the front. Can y'all give her a big applause? She is the president and CEO of Transformative Justice Coalition. And anytime I see anything going on, this is a woman who I see marching. I was marching in the Free Her rally. And guess who I see yelling Free Her coming up behind me? I said, Barbara? I want to, and this was not planned, but I want to pose a question to you very quickly because I know you might have to leave a little earlier. And this question is not a question of my own, but one that was posted on Raul Andrews' Facebook page. He put a series of questions on, questions on his page. And one of them that stuck out was when we look at the courts today, and we look at the courts that decided Brown v. Board, do you think, let me know if I'm wrong, Raul, do you think that the decision would have been decided the same?
Well, thank you. Thanks, everyone. I want to, thank Thomasina Yearwood, Dr. Chavis, and all the leadership of the mighty Thurgood Marshall Center. This is my office building.
Yep.
I'm up on the 4th floor, and I had to, when I found out about this program, I had to come by and be part and and listen to all the panelists and learn more and share with you this momentous occasion. Because this man for whom this building is named turned the world around, literally, and has set into motion progress that cannot really be ever overturned. So I wanted to say, when I read the SFFA, Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard case, which had been consolidated with the UNC case, when I read it last year, I shook my head because in order to get to the result that Chief Justice Roberts reached, he had to ignore years of history. Nothing in that decision talks about the fact that until 1950s, there were no African Americans consciously admitted into Harvard. He doesn't talk about it all. Doesn't talk about UNC and how half the campus was built by slave labor. Nothing. When you see that erasure, that denial, that racial denial, when you look at it, you realize that Brown is one of the few cases in which the Supreme Court has ever talked about white supremacy. One of the few. And if you invoked that legacy into the current decision making of the Supreme Court, then it makes zero sense to come up with a ruling like SFFA. And in fact, Janae Wilson, Cheryl Iphone, Elaine Brown, Elaine Jones and others, Ted Shaw, others who have been chief counsel and are still living, of course, of the NAACP-LDF, have said without question that there's no doubt that if this court had heard Brown, given the distortion they do of interpreting Brown and misportraying it in this decision, that they would not have reached the right result. Until we, as the legal profession, override the entire doctrine of strict scrutiny, and which basically has been used. Remember, strict scrutiny was never written into the 14th Amendment. It is a jurisdictional, it was created by the court, not until the latter part, beginning in the latter part of the 20th century. So that whole doctrine of strict scrutiny that basically says that you can't have any kind of racial element to any program, law, etc., has to be looked at with suspicion. And it's a suspect classification, as it's called. And law did not exist. And that this entirety of what the Reconstruction Congress tried to do in creating a 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment regimen in the 1870 Enforcement Act, all of that was done to give power to protect and advance the freedmen. But what they've done, and it started early, sadly, in the constitutional jurisprudence, is to take the 14th Amendment, which was meant to be a liberatory act, and have made it now a constraint upon black progress. It is a vicious turning on its head, and we got to understand that part of the fight is not just for racial justice, but we got to change the way the court even operates and how it looks at racial, quote, racial classifications. Because think about it, reparations. Folks are, screaming that we need reparations. Yet, the state of California has found out that in its own report of its own culpability in perpetuating racial injustice, that it is, however, constrained, it believes, in its ability to actually impose financial and other directed reparations. Because of this court's, in the prior court's interpretation. I mean, I just want to end really quickly by saying that we got to understand that after the Burger, the Warren Burger Court, the Warren Court as people call it, and the ascension of the Rehnquist Court, that we basically have been under a conservative court, domination, because Berger, retires. Rehnquist takes over. He's the longest serving Chief Justice in history, he was, for 18 plus years. 33 years on the bench, on the Supreme Court bench. And we got to understand that he's succeeded by not a liberal, not a moderate, he's succeeded by Chief Justice Roberts. So you have to see that we have had just decades now, more than a half of a century of conservative rule. And we need to think about what that means for this whole fight for African American liberation, but more critically, if we're going to ever have what we must have in this country, what has to be an inevitability, not just a possibility, but an inevitability of a just and inclusive multiracial society, we have to open up the pathways, not close them. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Barbara. Thank you so much. And just be on standby just in case it brings you back up. Just be on standby. Let's give her another round of applause.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to sit down next to our two distinguished panelists for this evening. A man who I could just eat up everything he also says, and whose mind is just amazing, Mr. Raw Andrews Jr. Esquire. He's the Executive Director of the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, whose insights into the psychological impacts of racial inequality are essential to understanding the full spectrum of this fight we are going to talk about. I also want to introduce Dr. Gene Axius. He's the President and CEO of Creating Healthier Communities, whose leadership is pivotal in bridging the gaps in health and well-being that reflect broader societal inequalities. Please give them a round of applause. We have a third panelist, Ms. Kim Keenan Esquire, who may be joining us a little later, so when she does, she's going to be one that lights this on fire as well. Let me first start with you, Raul, because it was your question on your Facebook page that begged the question, what would we see in the courts today if they had to decide Brown v. Board and the other 4 cases that were also associated with that? How do you think the courts were fair?
Well, good evening, and I want to say as a member of the Thurgood Marshall Center Trust Board, it is a privilege to welcome you to the 12th Street Y, and that is the allusion that our CEO made, that this was the first YMCA for African Americans in the United States. It was been around since 1853. In 1953, 100 years later, we were still in American apartheid. American apartheid. I mean, a lot of times we don't associate we say Jim Crow, it sounds sinister, but it doesn't sound as bad. Dr. Chavis is apartheid. American apartheid? What are you talking about? So, here's the thing I grapple with as a Washington lawyer and someone who has been in and around this community for well over 30 years is there were 5 cases in the Brown didactic. And there were some southern state cases, and there was in Kansas, and I guess Delaware to the extent you're looking at the Mason-Dixon line. And when you look at those 5 cases, 4 of the cases were emanating from the states. So you have this whole trigger around the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment has a due process clause, and it has an equal protection clause. And so you have any number of reasons why all of these Americans who happen to be black are outraged by the quality of the schools that their children are attending, Ebony, and they want something better for their children than they have for themselves. In one instance, for example, in the Delaware case, they didn't even want to go to a white school. They just wanted a bus for their school because it was too hard for their children to get there. In Washington, there were empty white schools. And they had just built this beautiful cathedral in what was then white Anacostia, called John Philip Sousa Junior High School. It was a cathedral. They didn't have enough people enrolled in the school. And it's like, look, we're not saying they have to go to class together, but why do they have to have less than evidence? Let them go to the school and they'll be on the other side, right? No, not good enough. We're going to rebadge 21 schools that are empty. And we're going to repurpose them. And go. There's Kim Keenan, ladies and gentlemen. Kim Keenan has arrived. I was just into the last hour of my opening statement. And so the question was, Kim, what would the court today do with the 5 Brown v. Board cases? And what I was getting to the quick point to say, and we're going to let you weigh in on this, and then Ebony will formally introduce you. I think on the state cases, it's a toss-up. I think in those state cases where the 14th Amendment applies, it's possible that they could get it right. It wouldn't be unanimous, we know that. But it's possible they could find a way to get it right. But in the District of Columbia, where the 14th Amendment does not apply to this very day, they use the 5th Amendment due process clause. There is no equal protection clause in the 5th Amendment. And under the principle of liberty, they were able to craft an argument that if it's going to happen outside the district, it should happen inside the district. So when you have all these fights about statehood, imagine a scenario where the Beltway is the Beltway as we know it, and all of the children in the District of Columbia can't go to the best and the brightest schools. They're still stuck in segregated schools. Maybe the Virginia schools would still be closed. And all of Maryland, they would have by county a different approach to what would be happening. But the reality of it is, what the court would have said about the district, like they always say, well, let Congress figure it out. You don't have no states. The city council can't do it. So Congress can't even keep a speaker. If you can't pick a Speaker of the House and keep it, how you gonna decide? So the do-nothing Congress that we've known about forever is truly a do-nothing Congress right now. And they're certainly not gonna do anything for the district. And then you get into this whole question of how do we pay for these schools, right? So what are the states gonna decide? Let's kick to the states. Let's kick to the counties. And now you got these property taxes that have created some systemic inequalities because property values are not equal, right? So Kim, I wanted you to get introduced because you do come with a long history in civil rights, and you have represented majority and minority bar associations as the CEO. No, but you've been on the front lines. Well, okay. I know in DC is president, but at the NBA, you would still be the CEO. But anyway, but I think we need to hear from you because you've been in the trenches.
So I'm gonna answer a question that I was asked when I came in, which is, would the Supreme Court get it right today? No. I'll be clear about that, unequivocal about that. They are obsessed with the 1800s. We do not live in a world where women can't vote and black people aren't people. So this whole notion that we're going to return to this pure time of the 1800s it's crazy. It's not even like annoying or disappointing or they've taken a wrong turn. It is absolutely absurd. And if they keep taking it to its logical consequences, we literally will undo everything that was ever done ever. And especially as affects voting, everything we ever got. When I hear people saying, we're not gonna come out, we're not gonna vote, we don't like them, they both old, they both white, they both old. It's to them, to some people, that's the statement, say the same person.
But they are not.
But they are not the same person. And I think what's upsetting about this is we don't have the luxury of playing that game. That's a luxury to be able to say, I like this one more, or I like this one, I'm just going to stay home because they about to say. That's ridiculous. Because everything we ever got as black people came from having the vote. And being able to voice that voice. And we have a do-nothing Congress and some stuff is stuck, but there's still the local elections. There's still all these things that are happening. They're still happening. Even though they're not doing nothing, stuff is still happening. And we have to decide whether the things that happen are things that we want to happen. The Supreme Court has a majority that is stuck in a past that makes no sense. Not just that it's different, but it just makes no sense. And I don't even know how Clarence Thomas can sleep at night, because if we go back far enough, he can't be married, right? He can't be married to her in 1890 and walk the earth free. He can't do that. So no, I don't have any faith in their. I have all kinds of faith in justice, keep around, keep hope alive, and I think that's really. My time at the NAACP taught me something. They have a saying, no permanent enemies, no permanent friends, just permanent issues. And we have, all our permanent issues are on the table for real. For real, not for play, but for real. Like, the true story, a guy came to my house to fix my TV, and he kept saying how old it was. And I kept saying, but it works. I kept saying, but it works. And he kept saying, your TV doesn't even have the technology. I said, but it does all that stuff. I can get to the internet. He said, it's so old that I can't even talk to you about this. And I said, how do you know my TV? Because he's just looking at it from the front, just like this. He said, because I do this for real. And ever since he said that, it was like a light bulb. People forget that people...
Did you get a new TV?
Yeah, I got a TV. My brother felt bad and sent me a TV. And it just goes to tell you that the people who've been on the ground, people like Barbara Irwine back there, people, like Elaine Jones and Wade Henderson and, all the people, anybody named Ben in NAACP. They've been 3 times. So anybody named Ben is just golden. And, this whole notion that they do this all the time. I used to wonder sometimes, like, oh, didn't we win this? Aren't we good? And they would always be like, well, we won it for now. But that don't mean it'll be that way in the future. And I think we got complacent. We really thought we had one of them. When they gutted the Voting Rights Act, that should have been like a red flag flying through the streets of America for black people. Because that meant we coming for everything. We got this, we coming for everything that comes else with it. And education is just one of those things, you know. I'm sure that Thurgood Marshall is turning over in his grave. It took a Chief Justice to die for Brown to come out the way it did. It wasn't like they just got together and this was the right thing to do. He said, I'm gonna keep pressing the separate but equal. Still, it's wrong what we doing, it's bad. We wrong. But not enough reason to overturn it. Oh, the law is good. We'll just say it's equal. We'll just say it's equal because it wasn't. And so this whole notion that we didn't earn every inch of this, you know what they call DEI? You know, I remember it first came out. In my back of my head, I kept saying, this is some fakeness. And it's just gonna be a mess. And you know what people in corporate America call DEI? Didn't earn it. We earned it on the blood. We earned it on the blood, on the backs of people who had to pick cotton first. So how dare anybody say we didn't earn it?
I want to bring in Dr. Access on this because you hit on so many things. One, when you were going back to 1800s, and we were talking about this whole MAGA movement, right? And when was America great again? That's something that we often repeat. But I want you to talk about some of the social determinants when we look at the legacy of Thurgood Marshall, of health and health equity that we have to bring into this conversation on the backs of what they both said.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm deeply humbled to be part of this conversation and to be in this amazing building and to be able to walk and see the portraits outside and to get recharged, not just about our legacy, but also about the fight that we're currently under and the need to stay focused in terms of exactly where we want to go. So as we're having this conversation, what I'm thinking about, I've been very fortunate to really study policy and really think about not just the intended consequences of policy, but the unintended consequences of policy. And the reason how I got into this, I'm, for better or for worse, I was from Florida. So I'll just put that out there.
Don't stretch your hands.
Yeah, please do, please do. But I say that intentionally, in part because of the fact that how I got involved in interest in policy was the fact that I was working in a state agency, and I saw just differences in terms of who was getting what and how they were getting it. And I got an opportunity to go work for a secretary, and I watched what was happening. And I would remember that oftentimes there would be all of these folks who don't look like us that would be in a room having conversations. And then eventually there would be some guidance that came out, some new policy that came out. And what happened was the state employees had to implement those policies. And then what I started to realize was the fact that it was very structural in nature. And what I mean by that is very insidious, right? Policy is very insidious, but it's intentional.
Yes. Yes.
It is targeted. And unless you actually focus on the legality, unless you actually focus on the intended and unintended consequences, guess what policy actually does? It perpetuates into the system. Why is it we still have these disparities? Why is it the wealth gap is the way it is? Why is it we have our people dying at much higher rates? Why is it when you look at every single indicator, we're falling low? That's not random. That is intentional. Similar to what you just said about DEI. Similar to what you're seeing across the country. Why is it that some of our black sisters who are leading some of these universities and colleges and institutions are being attacked
Attack, taken out.
and taken out.
Hard.
It's with precision because there's an agenda. When George Floyd was murdered, we all remember that. We will never forget that. The other aspect of that, in that same week, some of you may remember this and some of you may not. That same week, early in the week, was the situation in New York. Right? I'm tired of people saying we need allies. Because her profile was an ally. But she did an Oscar-winning performance. Had it not been recorded, could have got that man killed. Right? Insidious. Because what policy actually represents is values. That's embedded systematically to filter who is deserving and who is not. And it perpetuates, which is why it's structural in nature. So I have the privilege of serving as the president and CEO of Creating Healthier Communities. And the reason why I took on this role is because of the fact that if you think about the most precious thing we all have, and education is such a big driver to that, is our health. Is our health. Health is also equivalent to time. Time to spend with your family, time to spend with your friends, time to watch your kids grow up, grandkids, the whole 9 yards. Time. We can innovate. We can create all different types of products and services, but you can never replace time. This moment that we have here is all we have. You will never get this moment back. Right? So that means that time is expensive. Time is expensive. So why is it that so much of your life expectancy, in terms of how long you might live, it is directly correlated to your zip code? It's directly correlated to your zip code. So, if you're a resident in Georgetown, your life expectancy is around 94 years old. If you're a resident of Anacostia, your life expectancy is 64. Nearly 30 years. If you're a resident in Baytown or Buckhead in Atlanta, not too far apart, nearly 15 years difference in life expectancy. In this country, there is an average of a 13 to 50-year difference in life expectancy between two neighborhoods that are less than 5 miles apart. Think about it. 15-year difference, solely driven by where you live. We can stay here in D.C., but I'm going to take you to Baltimore real quickly. Governor Moore.
Can you give me that quote again, sir? I got to hear that one more time because really I didn't want to write it down.
So there's a 15-year difference in life expectancy in this country.
Yeah.
Two neighborhoods less than 5 miles apart. You can look at Chicago, you can look at Philly, you can look at New York, you can look at Baltimore. D.C. is 30, right? It varies, but on average. So if you ever get a chance to read Governor Moore's book, The Other West, he talks about living in Baltimore and how his father got sick. This is where I go back to what I was saying earlier, and I'm going to be quiet.
No.
And he talks about his father getting sick. And they rush him, they all go to the emergency room. And in the book, Governor Moore says, they looked at us, and because they thought that we were of lack, of no means, they told my father that, oh, it's nothing. You go home and just sleep it off, you'll be fine tomorrow. They go home, and then as the father is walking up the steps, he collapsed and dies. Tomorrow never came. He never had the opportunity to see his son become the first black governor in the state of Maryland. Time is expensive. Once it's lost, you can never get it back. There are the decisions that are intentional, that are with strict precision, that filters who is deserving and who is not. When you overlay, whether, again, zip code, when you overlay and you unpack it, so to answer your question, what are social terms of health? Is where you live, where you eat, where you work, where you pray, where you play, right? It's the schools you go to, the quality and access to healthcare. That is what we're talking about. And when you look at those communities where there is significant deficits in terms of life expectancy, it doesn't matter by geography, you see common themes of structural inequities that have perpetuated to make a decision in terms of who's deserving and who's not.
I want to have Kim. You want to jump in, and then I'm going to go to you, Rob, about the Bowling versus Sharp case. So go ahead.
I just want to make this quick point about what you're saying. You know, everybody knows that when I started out as a lawyer, one of the first jobs I had is I did medical malpractice. I did plaintiff's medical malpractice. And people like Barbara Ernline and Inez Smith-Reed were like, no, you need to do some civil rights too. So you wind up doing all of it at the same time. But the one thing I learned about health in America is if you're a white man, you get the best care that money can buy. It don't matter what you look like, or when they're trying to decide whether they should give you that extra test or that extra heart test or that extra scan. If you're a white man, most of the time you're going to get that. Now, you would think that it would be like just white people. But women, same thing. They might get the test, they might not get the test. Maybe certain white women get the test. Most black women don't get the test because we seem like we can bear pain. We seem like we can just work and keep shaking off.
Right.
That's why our babies die the most, because they, when everybody else will be rushed to get their C-section, they're saying just wait a little longer. And I mean, people think that it's based on your socioeconomic. Let me tell you something. I know a lot of very high-powered people of color who I have a girlfriend. She was about to start week 41, and she was sending me videos of her dancing. And I said, how many weeks has it been? I said, the little placenta is only meant to last so long. So you go in there and tell them that you need your baby delivered now. Sure enough, they literally just got that baby out before the baby was starting to meconium stain, which means the baby was starting to be brain damaged because they didn't have enough air. But that baby is perfect to this day. He's 10 years old. But that's because we didn't pay no attention to what they were saying. And then the worst care goes to children. Children get and of all colors, but mostly colored, are the worst care in America. And actually, I think women may even come a little after them sometimes. And so, this notion that we, if you come dressed right or you look, I've read records where the doctor said that the black woman was dressed too well. What does that mean? Did she wear a ball gown to the office visit? They said she was overdressed.
And to your point, there are many studies, and you already covered this story a lot. There are many studies that have proven it doesn't matter how educated that a woman is. It doesn't matter what her profession is. And we oftentimes lead with, when we go to the doctor, I am this, I do this, even if they are a doctor themselves and they experience the exact same care of someone that doesn't make as much as in a different class that they are in. So it doesn't matter. But when we talk about these issues, and I'm going to go to you all, these are some of the issues. Separate but equal still exists. This notion of that we can be separate and things be equal, whether we're struck down or not, that is something that I feel like people still try to abide by. And these are things that, not just in education, that you saw this team of lawyers fighting over and over and over again. And even with that, although many of us are familiar with Brown v. Board, the related DC case of Bowling versus Sharp is a bit of a lesser known case, but I want you to explain the key issues at stake in that and why it is significant in the broader context of civil rights.
Well, I want to pick up to that answer to that question, Ebony, where Gene left off. He talked about today's Anacostia. So people don't remember in old District of Columbia when Southeast was not all black or majority black and brown. It was a white community.
Southwest was
And so the challenge is the names of these neighborhoods in the district have remained the same, but the neighborhood doesn't look the same anymore. So, it's interesting what it's going to do to your morbidity and mortality tables, Gene, now that we've had the lightening of the district and what that's going to be. But it takes 2 generations to get those tables to turn. So the reality of it is, again, in Washington at that time, African American blacks were not necessarily up in arms about we have to be able to go to the same school. They just wanted an equal shot to send their children to good schools. And so the whole notion of we're going to repurpose some older schools that are underutilized instead of having, because the big part of the challenge for almost all these cases, Ebony, was overcrowding. As a matter of fact, in Delaware, and in some parts of the district, they were sending kids to school in shifts like they worked in a factory. And some of these schools were going, I'm on first shift, it's not first period, second period. We don't know where first period, second period came from. First period, second period came from what time do you go to school? Because you're working, these are your hours. And in some instances in the district, they didn't have the adequate curriculum. So you had to go somewhere else if you wanted to pick up a vocational in addition to your reading, writing, and arithmetic. So they built this new cathedral. And you have to look at the way World War II, right? We're trying to tell the world that we're the moral authority. The evil empire. And if we have apartheid, it's hard to go to the United Nations and all these other places and say we're superior when everybody can just look and see how you treat your people. It's bad. So, here you are within a stone's throw of the White House and the Capitol Dome, and it's systemic inequality. As a matter of fact, at one point in time, when they did the outlawing of the slave trade in the district, they had to do it because that beautiful castle that as the Smithsonian was right where it used to be next to the auction block. And so people were waiting. They would just be living outside on the National Mall. They're like, we can't have that. Can't have that. So in the end of the day, all they wanted to do was say, you know what? You got a lot of empty rooms in the new cathedral, this John Philip Sousa School in Southeastern District of Columbia. Just let us, we don't care if we don't go. I don't have to sit next to Gene. Let me just go. We'll be on the second floor or the basement. They can have the main lot. No, under no circumstance you can't do it. So white parents were mad. And the black parents were like, well, these 21 repurposed schools, why we want them if they don't want them? Like nobody wants to go to those empty schools either. Give us the cathedral. Can't do it. So they had to fight and they set up, James Nabrett, Charles Hamilton Houston's on the wall here in the center picture. That was Thurgood Marshall's mentor. Many people know in this area who Charles Hamilton Houston was, but outside of civil rights world and Harvard, many people never heard of Charles Hamilton Houston. And he was really the architect, but because of social determinants, he never lived to see 60 years old. And so part of our morbidity and mortality, can I make it to 30 if I'm a black man? Will I live to see 60 if I'm a black man? And if I'm a black woman, is pregnancy a death sentence? I don't need to have children. I don't want to have children because I don't want to die. So if we can't perpetuate the species, we're not going to be enough of us around. It's not enough of us as it is, but there's not going to be enough of us around because we can't ask our sisters to put their lives on the line to bring life into the world if they're not going to take it. So when I talk to my doctors, I ask the provocative question. I don't really understand systemic inequality in healthcare because as far as I know, in order to go to medical school, all of y'all had to take the same MCAT. There's certain required courses and you take the double boards. And then you have to match into residency. And you end up in all these same residencies. And in order to get certified to be a doctor, an attending physician, you have to go through gotta go through the same doctor. So how is it that everybody goes to the same school, they take the same classes, they take the same tests, and then they have Kim as their client, And then they don't ask the same questions. They don't take the same history. In some instances, they don't even ask for the history. And so that's what's happening. But again, what I think we sometimes make light, Ebony, to get back to the closure question, of what the significance of DC statehood would be. And I think Bolin versus Sharp is a very scary question because, again, the 14th Amendment does not apply to the District of Columbia because it's not a state. And so there was very creative lawyering. And so on the one hand, while it would have been a shame for Bolin to have been rejected, what would the furor have been when the Congressional Black Caucus came on in the 70s, early 60s and 70s, when you're all here and only these kids cannot go to integrated schools. And so that's what I love about, the other thing that's little known, the Delaware case, Buelow, that was the only case that actually won below. All the other 4 cases were decided against African Americans, right? Like, we got to keep it the way it is. It ain't perfect, but it's just what we know. We're comfortable with this. And but because it didn't go through a federal court, it went through a chancery court. And Delaware is the first state, so they have this court of equity. And so what the judge did in the chancery court is the judge in Delaware said, it's not unconstitutional, but I can agree that the books are not equal, the classrooms are not equal, the gym is not equal, the desk, they don't even have desks, it's not equal. So everything is unequal. The law does say it has to be equal, but I can't say it's a violation of the Constitution. So don't get mad at me. I'm just saying it's not equal. So if it's not equal, they win. Right? So when you tell Virginia that, what does Virginia do? We just shut the schools down, Virginia. Nobody going to school. We're not doing it. It's like in all these secular private schools and so forth and so on. Like, so it just, we gotta stay on the statehood movement. And it is about politics, it is about policy, Gene. But the reality of it is, if you live in the United States and you pay taxes in the United States, the fact that you are bigger than states that have 2 senators and a representative. Delaware only has 3 counties in the whole state. And almost everybody lives in Newcastle County, which is Wilmington. They got 3 counties. You got 8 wards. Come on now. Equal is equal, right? And right is right. And unfortunately, if you don't stay on it, you constantly become a test lab for whatever Congress decides to do or not do. And that's pretty much what the district is. It's a test lab. We want to try something out. We don't want to try something out. We want to implement policy. We want to see what could work. Okay, if California goes left and Florida goes right and we don't know what Texas is going to do, let's just try something in D.C. They can't stop it.
Practice.
Practice.
I think in all of this, and everyone else.
Microphone.
I'm sorry. As we keep talking, I keep going back to this quote. In recognizing the humanity of our fellow beings, we pay ourselves the highest tribute. And I think we use the word democracy so much that I think it needs to be swapped out with the word humanity. Because I think there has been a lack of humanity that has been seen.
But Ebony, are we humans? Like when people talk
about... Go real deep.
No, because when people talk about DEI and all these theories, critical race and all that, the one thing I tell them, and Kim and I have the luxury as this barber, we went to law school. We read Dred Scott versus Sanford. If you read Chief Justice Taney's majority opinion about what he thinks about the subhuman race of black people,
you're right.
And but for the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, with all these cases that they can overturn, Dred Scott has never been overturned by the Supreme Court. To this day, they can go in just like they go in on all these other decisions and say, you know what, that's not law anymore.
Well, slavery.
Well, we don't need to do it because they got the amendment. Well, you can still. You got the amendment. It's not. So I'm just telling you, Dred Scott is still a law of the land, but for the Civil Rights Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. And I encourage you, if you haven't ever read it, or if you haven't read it recently, just go look back. And the nice thing about the Google machine, if you don't want to read the whole case because it's painful, they already have his quotes highlighted. And essentially what he says in a nutshell, and Barbara or Kim, you can add as needed. When we put this thing together that we call the United States of America, neither you nor your progeny was ever considered in any fact about what we were trying. This is 1857 now. We weren't even thinking about you. 12th Street Y was open. We wasn't thinking about you, and we weren't thinking about your successors. So, because you were never part of the body politic to begin with, the fact that you think you could have, where would your rights come from? You're not human. You subhuman. You are inferior. What you are in school, and this is going to be painful, Gene, your kids are less innocent and more menacing. So they're less innocent and more menacing. So rather than give them mitigating factors so we can nurture them and put them in a better plateau, have we asked them, were you ready for class this morning? What did you eat? I didn't eat. But what does policy say? We can't afford the early breakfast program. Right? So now they come and maybe had chips on the way to school. Maybe. How do you get to school? I see the kids. I don't ride the train every day. But when I ride the train, they go to school on the train, unsupervised. We don't know what could happen to those kids sitting around adults all day on a train. You're supposed to be ready to learn. I mean, I know this is tangential, but I got to say this. I was in New York all last week, and I had an event uptown in Harlem. And so, because I didn't want any problems, no shame on your whole state, but I was. Soon as I got uptown, I got to 116th Street. I'm in a cab because I didn't want to take an Uber or Lyft to make sure nothing could go wrong. And usually when I'm in town and I have a major thing, I won't drive because I don't want anything to go wrong. If it does, maybe I got somebody who's a witness, right? The cop pulls over the cab driver. 7:45 in the morning. And then, of course, my cab driver was multicultural. I was multicultural. We both sitting there. The cop wasn't multicultural. Took his own sweet time. I'm sitting there dressed too well for my event in Harlem. The cab driver still got. I know you have to turn the meter off. I don't know what. But the long and the short of it is, he was going to impose as a police officer his will on our situation. That you need to turn the car off, give me your stuff, and then I know you're being imposed because I don't know where you're going, but you're going uptown. And neither one of y'all moving until I figure out what's going to do. I'm like, well, I can call Uber. He's like, no, I need you to sit in the car till I figure out what's going with it.
You had to stay too?
I had to stay. I'm like, I think I need to cut the meter off.
This was 2024.
This was May. This was Saturday, May 4th, 2024.
Right. I want to do this because there are more questions that I want to get to. This is such a rich conversation. We could literally go on forever. But I do want to say this. If there's anyone in the audience that has any questions that you would, we got questions. We got hands up already. Because I want to ask my questions, but okay, I see you too, Kimo. I got you. I want to hear from you as you're hearing this conversation. What are you thinking of, or how is it impacting the arena that you are working in, or if you're struggling in whatever area that you're in, and you're like, I'm trying to figure out what I can do. I'm hearing the issue and hearing the problem. What are some solutions, or where do we need to be focused? Hands raised. I saw your hand up first. So when you stand, just say, just give us your name, who you are, and so I will say this, y'all. This is going to be a stickler. I need questions, not answers. Not statements. Okay, questions, not statements. And then to all the panelists, I ask that you would be very brief in your responses so that we can get enough in.
My question, first of all, how's everybody doing? Dr. Rusan Etienne Jr., Southern Maryland. I'm actually an entrepreneur, philanthropist, and a public figure. Ran for State Senate and U.S. Senate here in Southern Prince George's County. I'm glad to see distinguished lawyers, most of your lawyers here, right? I saw Esquire. Lord, you said the key word. I want to ask the question. Are you familiar with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Because I like the point that you made. Human rights is so important. And we have worldwide, I hope I'm not offending anybody, but you have foreigners that come here and they know this code. They're highly protected. We talk about civil rights, but I rarely hear lawyers, advocates talk about that. And I want to know why aren't our black leaders speaking more about the universal code and how it really is. Human rights is the most important thing, and we always wonder how they come here and they're so well protected, and African Americans in our own country gets nothing. So my question is, how can we galvanize to bring awareness to that? And also, that's the area that I'm specializing in and mastering in. Human rights is number one. It really is. Human rights. So I really want to show this, especially to the lawyers too. I'm really
You
lawyers.
can start, but I'm familiar with it, but I can tell you why.
You can start up. I'll catch up on
I
you.
really want to hear that from the lawyer too.
I'm going to be very brief. The United Nations does not bind any of its member states. So what happens when the United States resolution is passed, it has to be ratified as a treaty in the United States. And so because the U.S. is a founder of the United Nations and is the largest funder of the United States, in many instances, the United States won't abide by some of those universal codes. So I'm not saying we couldn't incorporate it, and I'm not saying that some of the good laws that we have, think about it this way. In the world stage is human rights. In the United States, it's civil rights. There's a distinction.
That's why I said.
There is a distinction. Yeah. So
why are we avoiding it? Is it key?
Because the court's not enforcing. Go ahead, Barbara. Hold on. Barbara, you need
We don't let Barbara do that.
Yeah, Barbara, we're going to get you a microphone. Come on up, Barbara. Come on up. Give her a hand when she comes up. Barbara Ironwood.
And remember, she's going to ask a question on the statement. You did a statement, but I was
Well, actually, I teach a course on human rights. And so I do a course on comparative constitutional law globally and human rights. And one of the things most people don't know is that all these covenants and treaties that exist from the United Nations, the United States and many are not signatories. We have never signed on to the International Covenant for Women and Girls for Equality. We never signed on. There's so many covenants we have to sign, so many treaties. But then, where we have, like I served, the International Convention on Equal Rights, we have on racial equality. We basically have what we've done, taken exceptions. Meaning that we sign it, but we say it doesn't apply to us. And police it. So I write exactly what you gotta understand. There might be, you guys probably just been reading about this quote, slave Bible, where, out of the 60 to 74 recognized books in the Bible by all denominations, that when they did the slave Bible, they only had parts of 14 books. Okay? It's the same theory. Is that we have all these provisions under these under these covenants and treaties, but we only bind ourselves to very few of them. So that's why you get these inconsistencies, and that's why you have in every review of the United States, because we get reviewed almost every year, every 2 years, about our non-compliance, usually. And we always say, too bad, we never agreed to do that. We are, signatories, but we took exceptions, and it doesn't apply to us. So those are, and then we yell about our, federalism structure in the states and all that. But the other thing I wanted to just say, about, human rights is that we should never, our ancestors have been amazing. We never should underestimate them. If you want to read some good, real amazing advocacy, read Recharge Genocide. 1950 by African Americans filed to the United Nations.
Now you're going to ask that question.
Saying that the United States is engaging in genocide and the way that it treats African Americans. Well, during an unusually radical era for the NAACP, but it's really written by Paul Robeson and the Columbia law students who he worked with. It's an amazing piece of literature. If you've never read it, you gotta read it. It's one of the best things black folks have ever written, in addition to David Walker's Appeal and so many other amazing works. So I just wanted to add that, to your question, so I really love teaching, international law. It's fun. It's because we're so inconsistent, and if we actually applied it, we'd be so much better. So much better. Oh my goodness.
Before we go on,
And can I add one other thing before I leave? I just, in this conversation, just want to add two really quick points. You can't get away from Dred Scott if you can't get away from the orbit of Johnson versus McIntosh and the doctrine of discovery. The only case in the United States to this day that is still good law, that is based on a papal decree. But what the Pope wrote in 1453, I believe. And basically, it's the doctrine that says that you can destroy, rape, kill, maim, do whatever you want to anybody who's considered a heathen, take their land, and go forth and conquer the world, here too, and convert everybody you can convert. With the slave Bible, right? But anyway, I just think that, you got to understand that when you build your foundations on bad in the swamp, the flies and the mosquitoes and the alligators and everybody else going to still be around, sniping at your heels, and that, the 1831 Johnson versus McIntosh is basically a case saying that Native Americans have no rights. That's basically what it is. And Taney just takes it and builds from it. And the last thing I just wanted to mention is we never should have a discussion of Brown without including Pauli Murray. Without including Pauli Murray. Pauli Murray writes the actual, you could call it a dissertation. She had already graduated from law school, was finished, and never more. But she wrote it as a, quote, book article. And she laid out what Charles Hamilton Houston and Thurgood would call basically the map for what became Brown versus Board. She also writes in the same piece what becomes Ruth Bader Ginsburg will call the map for Reed versus Reed, the seminal sex discrimination case in the United States. And why Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when she filed her brief, signed Pauli Murray's name onto it. Even though she was a counselor, she signed her name onto it because she said she owed her too much intellectually. She's a native of Baltimore. Born and raised in North Carolina. Born in Baltimore, raised in North Carolina, in Durham. Amazing woman. If we haven't studied, we gotta understand her contributions to this whole field. Thurgood had no question about it. He would praise her.
She did the strategy.
Right, he would praise her. And so this is not a dispute. This is just something that we have allowed to go unrecognized. And we should always lift her up. I'm sorry. Thank you.
So we have a few more questions. I'm gonna.
so much for having me. So my name is. Oh, this close. Okay. Oh, I don't like audiences. I'm called.
That's all right.
That was me back there. My name is Colin Perryman, an esteemed panel. I'm sorry that I'm in front of you. My question is, the language of Brown v. Board, it didn't just include students, it included a faculty, staff, a maintenance, engineers. Because of a white pushback, we only started to try and address educational equity for students. Dr. Leslie Fenwick at Howard University, amazing scholar, like the old, a former dean of like the education school. We recently thought that we erased and fired not only, but 38,000 educators that were black. She found, brilliant scholar, that it was over 100,000 that we can count. And economists would tell you, one educator, one employee, and educators are of a level white collar, if they sustain 2 to 10 people. So if you do 100,000 times 5 or 10, it's hundreds of thousands of disenfranchised children, and families in the black community. It disappeared overnight, and we're pushed overnight. So my question is, though I think it's important to talk about the educational equity of children, students, to Dr. Fenwick's point, if we ever plan to achieve a true democracy and humanity, we also have to include questions about black educators, or black engineers, and secretaries and admins, and black nurses and social workers in schools. So my question for the panel, what can we do to not only enfranchise black students, which I think is a great but common question, and common as a regular, not below average, I apologize. But what can we do to enfranchise movements and advocacy for black educators and principals, and black school social workers and nurses that don't adultify and kill children, and so on and so forth? Is my question.
I think that I'm so glad you asked that, because that was a question that I wanted to also have in the end, was sometimes the fallout of the decision. We don't always talk about the black faculty, but that was kind of left out in everything. So now, I was talking to Raul about this. There was a test that was done before asking black children what they wanted to be. So many wanted to be teachers because they had that representation in front of them. After the decision, 66% of those that were asked that question changed their mind because now they don't have the representation. We had so many teachers that didn't have jobs that were left out of this conversation. So thank you for that question.
And to also know, this was the first time in the black community that black men went from a wise sage and elder to being a disciplinarian for white authority towards the black children. Think about that. That's powerful, to go from a sage of wisdom to being a part of disenfranchisement of your community's children.
And now you're losing that power.
I'm sorry to cut you off. I apologize.
No, that's fine. That was great. So, Dr. Axtell, you want to take that?
I'll start. So earlier we talked about this idea of how the unintended consequences of decisions and policy and the ramifications of it. I think to add to this from a solution standpoint, what we're needing to kind of start to think about is what are the opportunities in terms of building broad-based coalitions to fill those gaps, and then also to think about ways in which we can accelerate the pace of change in a very meaningful way to ensure that we're addressing the inequities that we see that are structural and generational in nature. So one of the things that we've been at CAC, we've created something particularly in the health space called Allies for Health. And Allies for Health Equity. It's designed to bring individuals, families, institutions together who are committed to the mission that every single person should have access to health care. Like Dr. King said, out of all the injustice in access to health care is the most inhumane because it leads to death, right? So part of this idea of an Allies for Health is because we're seeing on the front lines community-based organizations who are losing access to funding because of everything that we're seeing in terms of attack on equity, on DEI. So funding is being drawn back. When these communities-based organizations cannot, and they don't have the access to the funding, they can provide the services, right? So our foundations are starting to back away. Corporations are starting to back away. So I'm using this as a parallel to your question in terms of given the social workers, given the nurses, given the engineers, given the families, given the shifts that we've seen, we got to think about what are the broad-based coalitions where we're coming together and that we're rallying together to counter the agenda that's coming against us. So that's just one example, at least in the health space, in terms of something that we're doing. It's called Allies for Health. And what we're seeing is the fact that it's end-to-end, supporting thousands of community-based organizations on the ground, on the front lines, with quick resources to continue to provide the services to close those gaps. Because people need services today, right?
Kim, can you give, talking about the classroom, solution-based now, because we're going to kind of come to a close, but solution-based, how can we address this issue? I mean, from the collegiate space, we talked about Dr. Claudia Gay earlier, what we're seeing, the attacks that we are seeing, and how Black folk are being attacked directly when it comes to this. How can we think solution-based about the question that the gentleman asked earlier about what needs to happen even in those spaces?
Well, I think the number one thing is we forget there's so many barriers that we're still breaking them. You know, what did he used to say? If the mind can conceive it, you can achieve it.
Yeah.
Well, and then you have to believe it. Well, you believe it if you see it. Right? We have Mignon here. She's the first woman to be chair of the FCC of any color. And once you have the first one, guess what happens? You have a second one.
Yes.
And it's true for everything. It's so funny. I remember when Taraji P. Henson was talking about how she didn't make as much money. None of us make as much money as anybody else. None of us. Us teachers, the social workers, all of us. So we're in a constant, sort of push. To either break through and get to the positions that nobody else had, or we're trying to get the parity for what we produce. And some of us produce 4 and 5 times what other people produce, but yet, it's sort of like we're angry. We should be angry. We should be angry, but angry doesn't mean that I don't produce and I'm not collegial and I'm not. So some of it is systemic. The policies are created in a way, certainly in the medical profession, it's so expensive. I don't care how many loans and grants and work study you get, paying for a medical degree and a law degree now. I couldn't afford the law degree that I would get from the same schools I went to. Amen. And I know a lot of other people feel that way, but that's true if I'm a nurse. That's true if I'm a social worker. And I think, we're always, what I hate about now is we've become so divisive that we're dividing ourselves. And we're so busy looking over and saying, well, they had, or they did. Who is that? We're all that. I'm always black. All day long. I don't care where I am or what I'm doing. I'm catching a cab, I'm black. I'm calling Uber, sometimes I'm black. So I think sometimes we've lost sight of the fact that we all have to be pushing these things together, because this whole thing about how much money you make and why it's different and why you have to negotiate. I teach negotiation. I always tell people, you offer me money, I'm always going to ask you for more. I don't care what you offer me. I don't care if it was a number that's better than the number I had in my mind, because now I know that I'm worth even more. And so, it's a mindset. It's a mindset. And when we teach our children to think that way, right? It's a manner of thinking.
Yes.
And some of it, once we have it in our minds, then we can recreate it with our steps, and we do that together. We don't do that apart. We don't uplift, Barbara, but push Raw down. If we're doing that, that's the wrong direction. And it is all because everybody is teaching us the pie mentality. And the pie mentality is there's this one pie, and obviously this pie is small. Right? Obviously this pie is small, because that's why we gotta fight for these crumbs. We gotta fight so hard to fight. The pie is clearly bigger, okay? And if we focus on, we're all gonna have some pie, right? You don't come to my grandmother's house and not get no pie. So if we focus on everybody's gonna get some pie, I think we can push this, because teachers are at the core. They've always been, whatever color you are, if you're a teacher, you get treated bad.
Right.
So we all have to be focused on how, as people of color, we uplift the notion of. I would tell you that I could never say this before, but I'm raising my nephew. I'm looking for black teachers. I'm calling them up. No, my child needs I said this to the principal. My child needs a black man teacher. Now, mind you, it's not that many of them in the whole city.
Right.
But obviously, my call to the ancestors must have came true, because the next year,
It is
my child
important
had
to
a black male
advocate.
teacher.
It's important to advocate. I tell you, my husband in the back did the same thing for the niece that we are raising, and to an amazing school that he's at. But he said, "Where are all the black male teachers?"
Yes.
Directly. So I think that's important. We have to draw this conversation to a close, but I want to do two things. First, I want to give each one of our panelists, just give them a round of applause. This was such a rich conversation. When I told you we were off script, but it was on script at the same time. I want to give them each. Now, I'm going to need y'all to think about this and give you 30 seconds. And I'm going to use my timer this time. Snatch your mic. To just wrap this up as we commemorate 70 years. And so whether you are giving them a charge in what to do, a call for action, but I just want you to center them before they leave here. And Dr. Chavis, one of the Wilmington Tech.
All right now.
I need you to give a benediction because you have fought on almost every stage of this journey that we are on. And you are still fighting. To the point where we can't even find him sometimes because he's out fighting somewhere. And so I'm always thinking through your lens and through your perspective, how do you see this? So I need you to give us a benediction before we leave this place. So thank you. And I also, before I go, I want to say thank you to Thomasina Yearwood.
All right now.
She may be in many words, but this is a woman who moves and shifts spaces that she's in. And I would also have to say, I am part of the woman that I am. Aside from my mother, but from women like you that she told me to be up under. Women like you, women like Barbara, who when they walk in the room, I say they literally walk with grace and power. And women like Kim, who I've met along the way, who just like, go girl, go sis, go, right? Amazing and powerful. And to my brother, who I just met today, Dr. Axios, I'm like, oh my gosh, the words just flow. And to Raw Andrews, who helped put this together. Thank you.
Yes.
This is who summoned the people. Thank you so much for the work that you do, and especially when we're talking about mental health, because we had to you can't talk about this without talking about mental health. We could have stayed on that, because we are all going through some PTSD and trauma when it comes to this issue, which is why it's so relevant. So that was my 30 seconds. I'm going to start with you, Raw, and just 30 seconds in centering the people as we leave this place.
If it takes a court to tell you that you have rights, and you're a human being, how many rights do you really have? So what I need us to do is we move forward and we start to think about where we will be at the diamond jubilee of this decision in the 75th year. I need you to guard your peace. I need you to respect your time. And I need you to fight mediocrity in yourself and everybody else around you. That doesn't mean everybody's going to be a Thurgood Marshall. None of us is. But sometimes, whether we're tired or we're just fed up, and you don't have to do all that. You don't have to do all that. No, you don't have to do all that. But if you don't do it, then what's the result? So let's fight mediocrity so that we can get that our tomorrows can be much brighter than all of our yesterdays. Thank you very much for coming.
Just remember that the system is designed to work the way it is working.
That's right.
So if you want to change the system, we got to upset the setup, as Mary Phillips always talks about. How you do that is exactly what we're doing right now. We got to join forces, break through the silos. That's part of our part of our history. That we came together and said, you know what, we're going to upset the setup. We see the game. We see the game. Right? So let's upset the setup. We're doing it with Allies for Health, but we want to partner. This is our movement. The system is working the way it was designed. So let's upset it.
So when I listen to everybody, the words that come to my mind is progress is a precarious place. And we stand in this moment in time, and I sometimes feel like I'm waking up, and it's not. Maybe it is. It's not 1800, but it's certainly the 50s. It's certainly teetering backwards. And I don't know what was so great back then. I'm not sure that I can go back. I guess that's the thing. If you know people who aren't sure what needs to be done in this time, they need to remember that they can't go back. Whatever is wrong right now can't be worse than what was. And our ancestors were resilient. I think they had grace. And I think that they left a path for us. And we have this history. If anything, we should be fighting for that every day. Because that history tells us that we are in a right place. And that we have to keep pushing forward. And we can't let anybody turn us around. I don't know, I'm starting to get into a song. But the reality is, we're not going, I can't go back, okay? I'm all into this. I'm not leaving the country. I'm not going anywhere else. So we're going to have to fight it out here. I would prefer to fight it out with words. But whatever we have to do, we have to stay here. And we have to lift our voices for our truth. Because we're not supposed to be nowhere else now. I mean, we may have been brought here and we didn't want to come necessarily, but we're here now and we're not going back. And I think as long as we feel that way, we will stop getting stuck in the mud of what people look like and what color they are. They both white, they both old, but it's a whole lot more decisions being made than just that. And that's what we have to remember every time we vote. And we must always vote. I learned that from Bart.
All right.
Barbara, you an honorary panelist. You mouth.
Oh,
30 seconds.
Okay. There's a new study out of Black parents. And I was trying to figure out who did it. Black Enterprise just did a really gorgeous podcast on it, and interviewed parents and interviewed the people, the posters, everyone who put it together, and they say precisely what this panel's been saying, that Black parents want Black leaders in school, that they want Black teachers in school. It's really an amazing study, and you should definitely get it. The other thing, next year when we're sitting here, we're going to be talking about the consequences of the attack on HBCUs. We're going to be talking about it in depth because let's be honest, Texas, Tennessee, Mississippi, all are attacking the existence of HBCUs.
Yes.
Remember, Clarence Thomas said, even in SFFA, that if the poor little Negroes can't go to the best schools in the country, at least they can go to the HBCUs where they belong. That's basically what he says when you read his opinion. But once again, like he doesn't even understand the consequence for his own marriage. They are after anything that helps African Americans achieve. Query whether or not the legacy of Brown to SFFA is the creation of a permanent black underclass. If that's what the goal is. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Please give a round of applause to our panelists, Ronald Andrews Jr., Esquire, Executive Director of the American Psychiatric Association, Ms. Kim Keenan, Esquire, renowned trial lawyer and mediator with JAMS,
My lawyer.
Dr. Gene Axios, President and CEO of Creating Healthier Communities, and of course, Barbara Arnwine over Transformative Justice Coalition. Thank you to our panelists on today. I have enjoyed, before I bring Dr. Chavis back up, I've enjoyed being your moderator today. I've learned so much, and I hope you all have as well. I hope those who are watching online, you can go back and rewatch, take some notes. There were a lot of gems that were shared. Thank you for those who stood up, asked questions, and participated. Dr. Chavis, can you come close us out? And I think it's so important, as you run it in PA, you understand how media helps to censor some of these conversations, create some of this chaos, but also needs to also be on the forefront of dismantling some of the ills that we see. So thank you.
Let's give Ebony Morris a hand. She did a good job. Ebony Morris. And once again, we want to thank Thomas Yoga is retiring for over 2 decades. She's held this place together. We owe you a deep, not only expression of gratitude, but we need to figure out how to keep your legacy alive as we keep the legacy of Thurgood. Thomas Yoga. And there's another young lady we haven't mentioned. She helped organize and put this whole thing together. She's always in the background, but I want to give Stacey Palmer. Thank you. And let's thank the caterers. The food was excellent. So I'm so glad. Somebody asked me, well, why are you not on the panel? I didn't want to be on this panel because I wanted to be a student to learn. And let's thank our panel again because we all have learned and been enriched by what we've shared with us. Now, on the 20th anniversary of Brown, 1974, I and 9 other North Carolinians had already been sentenced to 282 years in prison because we tried to desegregate the schools in Wilmington, North Carolina.
That's right.
This is 20 years after Brown. Keep in mind that apartheid did not originate in South Africa. Apartheid originated here in America. And you have to understand the relationship between American apartheid, British apartheid, Portuguese apartheid, French apartheid, to the transatlantic slave trade. Correct. This is part of the benediction. In September of this year, Stacey Brown and I publishing a book on the transatlantic slave trade.
Hmm.
And one of the things I've gotten out of this panel is that we have not only control our narrative, define our narrative as a people, as human beings, yes, but as human beings that have been treated a certain kind of way. Not for a year, not for a decade, not for a century, but for centuries.
Yes.
And we dare not allow someone to erase or to distort or to retell in a way that's not accurate. So it's just not the qualitative measure of what we've been through, it's the quantitative as a people. I think we ourselves, we don't underestimate because we've never been told. The United Nations, you mentioned the United Nations? Yes, sir. They say it's 12 million people died in the transatlantic slave trade. Every year they up it. First it was 8 million, 10 million, now it's 12 million. What we found out in our book, and we're going to expose it, because you don't start counting the transatlantic slave trade based on who's the boat or who makes it over through the Middle Passage. There were over 60 million Africans tortured, murdered, and enslaved during the 500 years of the transatlantic slave trade.
Speak it.
60 million.
Yes. Please.
I broke out in tears at the National Press Club about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I was making a speech about how important it was to vote, Barbara. And I got to thinking about these swing states.
Yes.
And somehow I almost fainted because I saw all these men and women swinging from trees.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, Jesus.
And we talk about not voting. In a place where we swung and still swing from trees.
Yes.
So my benediction is, Lord, help us to remember. Lord, help us to transmit. Lord, help us to raise up another generation
Please.
that benefits. And you're right, when we strive for excellence, even those who like basketball, I see that this championship trials going on. Black men just stuffing it in the hoops. We always strain for excellence, not just in sports and entertainment. Beyonce then took over country music. Why am I making all this fun? Because we are a blessed people.
Yes.
We're not a cursed people.
Yes.
And we can't allow anybody to take away our blessing. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.